Fourth market period essay. We're going to start off looking at all three of these together. So you need to think about everything that you looked at and researched in this section here, because you're comparing the 1990 and the 00s to prior decades. So you want to go back to the 20s, 50s, and 70s. And you're probably going to structure this in 2 paragraphs minimum. So in this first paragraph, you're going to address the 1990s and the 2000s. And then you also want to come up with the 20s, 50s, and 70s. And you probably want to focus on like 1 or 2 things. And you're going to have to make a decision about whether or not things have gotten better, worse, stayed the same. And so you want to address one issue. For example, if you were talking about busing, and busing was only specific here, well, that means it's not an issue here, not an issue here, and it's not an issue in any of these decades. So that's specific to the 70s. It's probably not a good example and not a good one to use. Another thing you can do is, this one might be a little more challenging. Within the essay body, you kind of go back and forth. You give me a 90s, you give me an 00s, you give me a 50s, you give me a 70s. And then you kind of use that approach. But again, this relies on your ability to make some sort of thesis that makes some sort of statement about collectively where you see things have gone. So for this essay, you're writing about women. This one is about African Americans, and this one's about LGBTQ. We're going to move on. We're going to look at this essay comparing Generation X to Millennials and Gen Z. And again, you want to focus on 3 differences or the reasons cited by historians. You must reference historians in your research. It just can't be, oh, Gen Z is about technology, millennials have technologies, and Gen X don't. And do not make the mistake of calling Gen X baby boomers. Baby boomers would be the decade before. For this essay, collapse of the auto industry. So here we're going to be talking about 4-cylinder cars, which are cheaper, which are efficient, which are economically or environmentally safe. That is a very different approach to cars being built here as well as being built here. Why the change? Because of issues that happened in this particular essay here in the 70s. So that's what you're looking at for this essay. You need to answer the questions here. Napster and Wikileaks. So you want to talk about Napster or Wikileaks, their either use or their design. How were these two designed or how were they used? WikiLeaks definitely is a little more political. Napster is going to focus more on copyrights. So you could focus on how the software or how the website was developed, or you can focus on what it was used for, or you could even address the political implication and outcome of those new technologies. If you are writing about general technology, you need to access Clinton's future work report. And you need to make a connection from the report to present day examples. So future work was written in the 90s and they made some predictions. So now here we are, 2020 beyond, and you need to figure out whether or not those predictions that were made here were accurate or not. If you're writing about this, you're writing about automation evolution. So you want to start with the 1920s and talk about how products being produced have evolved and changed. Here they're being made with machines that are manned by males or females in factories. And by the time you get into the 80s, you're starting to see things more computerized. So that's what you need to focus on, the transition to producing products. For shopping, I was in 19 golden age of shopping, malls and their decline. So here we talked about the mall boom, and now we're starting to look at the decline of shopping malls. How did that start? Why did that start? What's happening with Americans as they're shopping and changing their shopping patterns and behaviors? You're writing about terrorism. Why was 1970s labeled the golden age of terrorism? First thing you want to do is do a Google search for the golden age of terrorism and figure out what people are saying about the golden age of terrorism. 1970s, golden age of terrorism. There's probably plenty of stuff here. Maybe, I don't know if JSTOR's got anything. So you want to focus on why, in particular, was the 1970s considered a golden age for terrorism. Essay topic 2, abortion terrorist groups in America in response to Roe v. Wade. So Roe v. Wade is passed, and this leads to a situation where people of the extreme religious right want to go back to old ways. with regard to nuclear family of the 1950s, 1960s. So you want to focus on how far-right terrorist groups, in particular abortion terrorist groups, you probably want to look up the Army of God. That would definitely be one of them. And you want to focus on their motives or methods in response to Roe v. Wade. Do not reference 9/11 at all. We're not looking for a 9/11 essay. Politics, same thing with genocide. You're looking at either the New York Times or U.S. documents. You can go to ProQuest here. You can go to my Holocaust Genocide tab. I even believe somewhere in this file, if we were to go down to the bottom, see Rwandan documents link at the end of this file. So you probably want to go there and access those documents that are positioned there. Let's see where we at. All right, politics. Back to politics, the resurgence of the religious right. So you want to look at the 1980s and how the religious right emerges. What are their issues? Why are they emerging as a political force? And the answer is going to rest in either the sexual revolution, abortion, or a decline of family values. So that's what you want to focus on. If you're writing about this, you're looking at Asian migration numbers. In particular, you could look at New Jersey and why there's a boom in towns like Edison as well as South Brunswick that have a high Asian migration population. And you want to go back to the policies that were here as well as the policies were here. So we have a decline, no Asian migration because of the legislation. And then once the Hart-Celler Act is passed, you start to see Asian migration go up. How Reagan crushed the unions, ending the fight for labor that Karl Marx wrote about in the 1800s. So this one, you want to look at the PACO strike and how Reagan resolved the PACO strike and what he did that acted as a starting point for the decline of union membership. And union membership in the 1920s is going down. 1930s, it starts to go up. They experience a golden age. And then by the time you get to like the 80s, you start to see this decline that starts to emerge. What was significant about the PACO strike and Reagan's solution to that? Fashion. How did fashion people dress in the 1980s? You can go on my site. There's a section there under second and third marking period. There's a couple of sources for that. How did fashion influence gender or racial identity? So you can focus on some of those components. I know I have some somewhere on there. There you go. Fashion in the 70s. Well, that's the 70s. There's future work. 1980s fashion. This article right here. Let's see. Film and the AIDS epidemic. So for this one, what you want to do is look up these films, Ryan White story and the band Played On. And you want to focus on how those stories either helped tell the story of the AIDS epidemic or how it increased fear. It could be various things. Either people are going to be educated about AIDS, they're going to be educated about homosexuality. It's going to be viewed as a way to make villains out of gay men. That's what I want you to focus on. What was written about these these films that talk about the epidemic portrayal in film? If you were writing about this topic, what role did benign neglect play in the South Bronx evolution of hip hop? Do not write a summary of lyrics. So what you want to do first is read benign neglect from the Nixon administration. What was this policy? How did it work? And more importantly, how did benign neglect, following benign neglect, lead to the decline of South Bronx? And then how did that lead to the evolution of hip hop? And if you're writing about this one, you're comparing songs, poems from the 20s, Harlem Renaissance, to Afrocentric rap music of the late 80s. So you want to first figure out what this particular type of music is about, and then you want to make a comparison. Was there any similarities or differences to songs from the 20s or poems?